I am going to talk about the state of innovation in Bitcoin. This is a little bit of a change of direction of where we've been all day. We've been talking a lot about why people should have Bitcoin, the macroeconomics behind why Bitcoin is so important to our financial future. But there's another part of Bitcoin that I feel is a little underappreciated and underdiscussed, and that's innovation. Bitcoin is not just an asset, but it's a technology. And not just a technology, but a technology protocol, which is really important because it allows other technologies to build on top or around it, and it creates something entirely different, much like the internet did. When the internet came around, it was not understood very well, but it changed the way that we communicated, that entertainment was provided, music, content, everything. And so that was a protocol for exchanging information and ideas. And Bitcoin is a protocol for exchanging value. So that's why I get so excited about it. Because I'm not as well known as many of other speakers that have been on stage today, I just want to give you a little bit about my proof of work or what I've been doing that makes me excited about talking about innovation. So I had a degree in economics, Keynesian economics, so we know that was kind of a waste of time, as we have all come to learn. And then after that, I went to work on Wall Street, the den of the devil, so we know where that led me, but I did have the good sense to actually raise consciousness of myself and say, I got to get out of here. And so I moved to Mexico, where I've been for over the last 20 years. So I've lived in an emerging economy where I've had my value in my bank account be devalued by 50%. I've experienced the pain of sending money to an employee and how long and expensive that takes. And I've experienced what it is firsthand to live in a system that does not have financial privilege. So all of these things have led me to where, when I did learn about Bitcoin in 2012, it did not take me long to understand and appreciate what it could do. At the time, I was raising a venture capital fund, Me to Ventures. So I also have a background in venture capital and investing in technology. And so although I was interested in Bitcoin, definitely, and I bought Bitcoin in 2013, it did not take me long to try and go from concept to execution on it. But I was focused on other technologies for a while until I just realized that by the end of 2023, I closed down my venture fund and I said, I want to devote all of my time and energy into Bitcoin. So where I am today is I'm the co-host of the Build with Bitcoin podcast. It launched on April 21st of last year. Anyone know the significance of that date? The last halving, not a coincidence, actually, we planned it that way. And I'm also a partner in Base Layer Advisors, and we're an advisory firm working with family offices and private corporations to help them develop a Bitcoin strategy, not just Bitcoin itself, but also Bitcoin as a transformational technology. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Casa de Satoshi. It's a space in Mexico City, very similar to Bitcoin Park. Well, our aspiration is to be similar to Bitcoin Park and Bitcoin Commons. And now we have Presidio Bitcoin in San Francisco. So it's a space dedicated to co-working, events, education, and all things related to freedom technologies. So Build with Bitcoin podcast has given me just a real front row into innovation and what's happening. I have a great co-host, Israel Munoz, and he and I have since launched released 49 episodes. We concentrate a lot on the founders. We've welcomed 23 founders to the stage, and we've had 11 investors. We also do something called a deep dive, where we go a little bit deeper into technology or concept where we think that our audience might need a little more education. And our audience is not just Bitcoiners, but we also aim for traditional investors and entrepreneurs that we think should be exposed to what's happening in Bitcoin as a technology and try and encourage more people to be a part of this innovation. We also have something called highlights, which are every 5 episodes, we take 30 minutes and we kind of do a little rundown on what those last 5 episodes were about, because we know that the only thing scarcer than Bitcoin is time. And so we want to make it easy for people to find. That's going to drive the use and adoption. Same thing with payments, same thing with moving money across borders. So all of these tools, when you look back 5 years, 10 years, you can't imagine the progress that we've already experienced in these realms, but we need more. We need more to continuously innovate, not to change Bitcoin, but to have tools. And I mean, if you remember the internet, anyone remember the internet in the early days with the dial-up modems and the clunkiness, everything kept falling, the disks that dropped from the sky, the private networks that allowed you to be on the internet. So technology, as it goes through adoption phases, can be clunky, but the tools, now it's so seamless. I mean, we carry our phone around and we have music, entertainment, everything. So think about the adoption as the path of technology and tools to help ease it. What I'm going to talk about today in terms of Bitcoin innovation are 3 different topics, 3 key takeaways. First, releasing this report on the Bitcoin ecosystem that was released in February this year, super comprehensive 148-page report that's very easy to read because it breaks it down into different sections. So if you're curious, I'll also add a link to that report that you can go through. But this is from that report, and it goes through the different areas of innovation on Bitcoin. I'm not going to talk about all of these today, but I am going to highlight the 5 areas of big ideas that for me are most exciting. Other people may have different ones. First idea, and this is not really game-changing idea, but it's so important and it represents most of the innovation that's taking place today. And that's consumer financial services. That's exactly what I talked about. It's like, how easy is it to share a wallet, to get somebody to download an app, to transfer money from one person to another, to buy Bitcoin. I personally know what they're working on and am excited about the developments that they've created and the problems that they're solved. Extending this on a little bit, this is still big idea number 1, we're seeing some new things in financial services for consumers. First of all, I think that one of the big areas that we'll see growth in the next couple of years or in the cycle is in lending, or basically extracting value from the appreciation that you've experienced in Bitcoin. And so it's been a very delicate dance. We've seen a lot of pain and suffering come from irresponsible lending platforms and platforms who are lending that did not take care of your Bitcoin. And so hopefully those days are over. I think we have some new standards in place for visibility and to ensuring that the Bitcoin that you're using as collateral is indeed held correctly. One of the companies that we've talked to, Lynne, has been in the space prior and after, and they have a great attestation platform, and they have some lending practices, an API that other institutions can use. They can whitelist the only one. Another really interesting company in the space that's newer is AnchorWatch. And AnchorWatch is insurance on your Bitcoin. And it's backed by Lloyd's of London, and it has a very clear, easy to understand, and I think innovative way of securing Bitcoin. In addition to that, it also is using a type of Bitcoin technology called Miniscript, which is a time lock contract that you enter into with AnchorWatch and the third-party custodian. And it's really remarkable because I think it also is another way of implementing inheritance planning. So in the event that your partner or heirs aren't as comfortable with Bitcoin, it provides kind of a roadmap for unlocking that Bitcoin to them should something happen to you. But it has, I think, a lot of different applications, and that's why I'm excited about the technology implemented there. But a lot to see. He's remaking financial markets. I think I mentioned to you that I worked on Wall Street. And so, Wall Street is a strategy, which is one example that they actually have in use. And they're putting it on the liquid blockchain, which allows it to trade 24/7 and open themselves up to financial buyers outside of the United States. So it gives the ability to trade a US security globally anytime, day or night, which I think is really innovative. Another example is a company called MeFiel out of, and you promise this asset against this one, and then you can double promise it or triple promise it. That was a problem in the system. So what MeFiel has done is find a way to tokenize that and secure the signature on the blockchain so that it cannot be changed and it cannot be duplicated. And it's had enormous response. In the last 18 months, they've written $2 billion in these contracts, and it's on the Liquid network, layer 2 up from Bitcoin, and so they're experiencing enormous success. And the founder, who I've known for years, he launched a Bitcoin-only exchange in Mexico in 2014, and he had competition from another exchange that was more like Coinbase, that had all the tokens on it. So he ended up selling that technology to Ricardo Salinas' bank, and that's being used there. And he kind of shifted, but Bitcoin-only mentality, found a way to kind of pivot his company, as a good founder will do, into something that is using Bitcoin to totally reshape how financial markets are done. Just another example of some great innovation. And then Lightning Network is now, with Taproot Assets, is now enabling more innovation in terms of assets. And one example that we saw was on January 30th, Tether announced that they were going to begin to issue USDT on Bitcoin blockchain via Lightning Network, as opposed to the other, well, in addition to the other networks that they have. And the thought is that more and more of USDT will move over to the Bitcoin Lightning protocol, because it has greater security of decentralization, and probably also is faster than the other chains too. So we all know it's a superior blockchain, right? So Tether knows that too, and that's why they're moving to Bitcoin and blockchain. They started there, and then they moved to the other chains because of the speed and fees, but now they're coming back home to Bitcoin. Number 3 in big ideas is verified information. This is something that's really interesting. There's only one company I know of that's doing this currently, but I like them a lot. Simple Proof, maybe you guys know them, but they started out of Guatemala, securing the Guatemala elections because election results were being contested. Imagine that. And so what they did was they took the ballots and immediately, there's a 10-minute lag, but every 10 minutes, they would secure those ballots on the Bitcoin blockchain so that if it was contested later, they could go back and they could say, here is the information on the blockchain that cannot be altered. Now, for all of those who are worried that this sounds a little ordinals or inscription-like and could take up valuable block space on the blockchain, they're utilizing Merkle tree technology, so it's a very tiny amount of data that then expands down to detail all of the other data points in the file. So it uses a very small amount of data. But they did implement that. I think there was a county in Georgia that implemented Simple Proof's technology in the last US election, presidential election. But in addition to elections, just imagine driver's records or any type of information. I think as we go deeper into the world of AI, a lot of our identities could be duplicated, compromised, not valid. And so by having our own ID or our own identity validated on the Bitcoin blockchain, I think there's enormous potential for this sort of technology to be very useful. I'm not moving forward. Okay, stand by. Number 4, this is frankly my favorite one. That's why I had to wait for the slide to come up. Micropayments. I get so excited about micropayments. Anyone else think about micropayments day and night? Only me? Anyway, micropayments is Bitcoin is divided into Satoshis or sats, and it's like the ability to make payments in small amounts can change how every day is done. Payments are done. One of the examples that I'm going to share with you is Thunder Games. It's a company that we interviewed, and they're actually using micropayments when you play games. If you're on a gaming platform and you get rewards, you get them paid in sats, not in dollars. And this has introduced an enormous amount of people in the world of gaming and just casual solitaire players and whatever to Bitcoin, because you have to have a Bitcoin wallet. Many of these people have never had that. And you had to accumulate a certain number of points before you had enough to cash out and move it to the wallet. Not with sats. So with sats, you can cash out at any amount, anytime, 24 hours, day or night, and it changed the world of payments and gaming, really a revolutionary concept that can be translated into other technologies and other applications. Content. How many of you have multiple newspaper subscriptions or magazine subscriptions online that you have to pay for? Or you reach that 10 minimum article and you can't go any further and you can't read that article you want to read. Wouldn't it be a wonderful world if you could just pay a couple of cents or sats for the article that you wanted to read, or for the amount of the article you wanted to read? Or how many of you have Netflix, Apple, Hulu, whatever, multiple subscriptions? Wouldn't it be nice if you could only pay for the movies or TV shows that you watch, or the amount of time that you watch them, and just have that directly debited to your Bitcoin account? It's a tremendous concept, and I think it also encourages better content, because you only people who will only get paid if they produce content that's utilized. That goes into the streaming too for digital services or subscriptions of software. I mean, how many, we've got Adobe, we've got Microsoft, we've got all of these things that you have to pay for on a monthly basis, and they no longer give you, I think Rockstar Dev was saying yesterday, he was old school and he really liked to buy software and just own it. Well, you don't have that option anymore. But what if, instead of having to pay a monthly subscription for something you may or may not use, you could only pay for the time that you're actually utilizing that application? And then API access too. But I think, there's a lot of conversation these days about Bitcoin store of value, Bitcoin payments, and how do we encourage payments? How do we encourage payments in a world where every time you make a payment, it's capital gain or whatever? I mean, what if micropayments is actually the path to payments? What if micropayments is the path to medium of exchange? We're thinking in fiat terms that we need to buy a cup of coffee or a house or make a transaction that we typically do with fiat. But what if Bitcoin's killer app for medium of exchange is actually micropayments? Something to think about. Another area that I get excited about is the concept of AI agents. This is a little bit in the future, but it's exciting. We've seen such fast adoption of AI agents. They anticipate that it'll be a $1 trillion economy, maybe as big as the unbanked. Maybe AI agents are the next unbanked. But this is a way for depositing an allowance to your AI agent and let it go off and do the work that you want it to do. Now I'm going to switch and talk about theme number 2, innovation from a founder's perspective. I think this is really important because thoughtfulness from the founders, the way they approach the growth of their business, the way they approach bringing their product to market, the way they approach hiring. I mean, when you live on a Bitcoin standard and with a Bitcoin mentality, every decision you make for an expenditure is, what if that's in Bitcoin? As we all do, right? So it's shifted the whole narrative of how a founder thinks about growing their company, and it tends to be more productive. Founders they have to answer questions about when will they be profitable, and profitability for Bitcoin companies often is if they have sats flow. So many of these companies are actually charging in Bitcoin, or they're earning Bitcoin from their clients, and so they're putting a part of that into Bitcoin treasury. They have to also show why their company will outperform Bitcoin, which I think actually retaining some of the Bitcoin and what they're finding. And we found this in interviewing the founders, and it's also very well detailed in the Epoch report that I mentioned earlier, is it's providing protection against dilution. So what that means is, as a founder continues to raise money from investors or from venture capital, the amount of the ownership of their company goes down because they have to give it up in order to attract investment. If they have a Bitcoin treasury that's increasing in value, then it allows them to go longer without having to raise money and keep more of the investment on themselves. I think it's a game changer, and this is why we're seeing other companies like Metaplanet, for example, put Bitcoin on their treasury as a way of protecting against dilution. Metaplanet is playing from the Saylor playbooks, where it's more store of value and shifting their assets into Bitcoin, but you can see the parallels. Fold, which is the only company, or I have so much to cover. But Bitcoin, innovation, and VC, these two charts just show the mismatch. We've got a market cap of 58% in Bitcoin, yet Bitcoin is only receiving 2.5% of venture investment compared to crypto. Total mismatch, total opportunity. This really means that you have an opportunity to invest in Bitcoin venture while it's still very undervalued. We have about 15 VCs that operate on a purely Bitcoin basis. They tend to be very close to their founders. It's an early emerging market. Probably the biggest fund, I think, is now raising 200 million, 1031. They're one of the oldest ones in the space. There's some great firms out there, and they tend to be all based in the US and Europe. So it's a small ecosystem right now, but still one that's great to get involved in. They have some of the same challenges with LPs trying to attract money and proving that they're going to outperform Bitcoin. But we also find that it changes their time preference. They work closer with the founders, and they also have the exit potential of returning to their investors in Bitcoin as Bitcoin becomes more scarce instead of traditional cash. So how do you get involved, and why is this important? I want to encourage everyone in this room, most of you have Bitcoin. Once you have enough Bitcoin, or well, no one ever has enough Bitcoin, but if you broaden your thought horizon to think, not only am I going to have Bitcoin in some way, it's so important because it will determine the use and adoption of Bitcoin as we go forward. I want to thank you very much. If you're curious about this, I invite you to join us on the podcast and just listen to the innovators and the investors who are supporting them as we go forward. Appreciate it. Thank you.